I said hands on the car. Now. Her Louis Vuitton briefcase hit the pavement before her voice could. It was 6:42 a.m. on a damp Tuesday in downtown Houston. The sun hadn't quite committed to rising, and neither had the people. Except her, Judge Marcia Ellison. 40th birthday, 3 weeks ago. 10 years on the bench. 20 in law. No criminal record. No traffic violations. And right now, her face was being shoved against the hood of her own Lexus by Officer Daniel Whitaker, badge number 31577. She wore a burgundy pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun. Her judicial ID was clipped to the inside of her coat. She had just finished her morning jog, stopped for a smoothie, and was on her way to court to oversee a high-profile civil rights abuse case. Irony was bleeding down her cheek. "Stop resisting," Whitaker growled. His grip tightened. His knee nudged her thigh. "I'm not resisting," Marcia hissed. "You're making a mistake." He rolled his eyes. "They all say that." They. That word hung in the air like a racial slur whispered in church. A crowd began to form. Phones out. Recording. Muttering. She didn't scream. Not yet. Not when the cuffs cut into her wrists. Not when he pushed her into the squad car like she weighed nothing. Not even when he called her ma'am with a smirk right before slamming the door shut. Only when he misread her silence as submission did she turn to him, locked eyes through the rearview mirror, and said calmly, "You're going to regret this." Whitaker chuckled. "You people always got something slick to say." He meant black people. She knew it. So did he. At Precinct 7, the desk sergeant stared at her ID for a full 5 seconds. His lips parted. He stood straighter. "Judge Ellison?" His voice cracked. "Yes," she replied, her wrists still bound. "Judge Ellison." "Officer Whitaker, we need to—" "Don't interrupt me, Sarge," Whitaker barked. "This one fits the description. Black woman, mid-40s, ponytail, burgundy jacket, loitering outside Whole Foods, possibly casing vehicles. Dispatch called it in." Marcia laughed once. It was cold, bitter. "You think I was casing cars for Whole Foods?" "You were looking around suspiciously." "I was stretching." She had a bag. Could have had tools in it. It was a briefcase with court files. "My docket for today includes your supervisor's son." The sergeant winced. Whitaker blinked. "Runner ID," Marcia said flatly. "I'll wait." It took 29 seconds for the system to pull her up. 17 for everyone in the room to go still. And in the silence, Marcia spoke not to beg, not to forgive, but to remind. "This isn't just about me," she said. "This is about the assumptions that build your instinct. That a black woman alone in the early morning must be up to something. That your gut is justice. That your badge is truth." No one moved. No one breathed. She turned to Whitaker slowly. "You've just arrested the judge presiding over your upcoming misconduct trial. And now I will see you againly this time. It will be in my courtroom." That night, the video hit Twitter. By morning, it was on CNN. The courtroom was packed. Local news, national outlets, families of past victims, professors from Rice, civil rights activists, law students gripping notepads like lifelines. And at the center of it all, Officer Whitaker, pale and sweating in his pressed blues. And her, Judge Ellison, robed in black, regal, poised, the gavel already in her hand, though she hadn't struck it yet. "You may proceed," she said. The prosecutor rose, a young Latina with fire in her voice and receipts in her briefcase. She outlined Officer Whitaker's 10-year record, dotted with complaints from Black and Latino Houstonians. The numbers weren't extraordinary, but the stories were. Rodrigo Vasquez, tossed while reaching for his phone. Tamara Jackson, pulled over for driving too slow on her way to her own baby shower. And then there was Jamarian Scott, 15, slammed to the ground outside a high school basketball game. Fitting the description, Whitaker had said, every story followed the same template. Wrong place, wrong skin, wrong assumption. But none of them, until now, had a courtroom with this much visibility. And none of them had Marcia Ellison on the bench. Whitaker's Liera tired-looking man, who seemed to realize this was more a funeral than a defense did his best. Reasonable suspicion, tense neighborhood climate, high-stress decisions made in the moment. He even pulled the split-second judgment line complete with citations. But it crumbled when the body cam footage played. Marcia's voice was calm, polite, identifying herself, repeatedly, and Whitaker's smug, dismissive, mocking. I set hands on the car. Now, the audio echoed in the room. The phrase felt uglier now, like a fist unclenching into a slap. After recess, Judge Ellison looked down at the courtroom. Then she looked directly at Whitaker. What is justice to you, Officer Whitaker? He hesitated. Enforcing the law, even when your enforcement is based on assumption. I followed protocol. She leaned forward slightly. Did protocol say I was guilty when you saw my skin? My clothes? My walk? No, he admitted quietly. It didn't. What did? He didn't answer. You're not the first white officer to mistake presence for threat, she continued. But today you're the first to be judged by someone who knows what that mistake feels licking both sides of the bench. She paused. Do you believe I was casing cars, Officer Whitaker? No, he said, voice cracking. Do you believe I pose a threat to you? No, ma'am. Then the question becomes, how many others were you wrong about? How many times did your instinct override truth? Silence. And then she struck the gavel. Once. Outside the courthouse, microphones waited. She didn't stop for them. Behind her, Whitaker sat alone on the defendant's bench. The verdict would come later, but the reckoning had already begun. The courthouse buzzed with a restless, electric silence. No one knew what would happen next. A white police officer charged with racial misconduct, caught red-handed arresting a sitting black judge. That wasn't just news. That was a reckoning long overdue, a mirror shoved in the face of a city that had polished its image while burying its guilt. Judge Marcia Ellison sat alone in her chambers. The robe hung heavy on her shoulders now, not with shame, but with the weight of what it meant to wear it today in this case. She didn't drink coffee today. Her stomach wouldn't allow it. Her hands, calm on the bench, were now clenched tightly in her lap. There was a knock at the door. Her clerk, Denise, poked her head in. We're ready to resume, Judge. Marcia stood, smoothing the front of her robe. Her breath caught briefly, not from nerves, from restraint. It had taken her decades to learn not to let rage control her, but today it begged for release like never before. In the courtroom, the jury had returned. 12 faces of mixed race, gender, age chosen carefully. Behind them, the crowd had grown. Law students had texted friends. Journalists had made calls. People who'd never met Marcia Ellison or Daniel Whitaker were now invested, because this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about how systems look the other way until someone important gets hurt. And Marcia Ellison had always been important, but only now did they see it. Mr. Whitaker, the prosecutor said, you may take the stand. He hesitated. The entire courtroom noticed. His attorney whispered something sharp, probably reminding him what was at stake. A demotion, a firing, possibly jail time, definitely shame, and worse precedent. Once he was seated and sworn in, the prosecutor approached with an eerie calm. Officer Whitaker, she began, have you ever been disciplined for racial profiling? His jaw flexed. No formal discipline. Have you ever had complaints filed against you for it? Yes. How many? 5. And how many of those complaints were investigated thoroughly? He paused. 1, I believe. And the others? Dismissed. She paced once, then turned. Do you remember the names of those who filed them? He swallowed. No, ma'am. I bet they remember yours. Objection, his attorney called out. Sustained. But the jury had heard it. That was what mattered. Then came the playback. Video clips, each one short, brutal, grainy. Rodrigo, curled on the pavement, a taser dart in his side. Tamara, weeping as her child screamed in the back seat. Jamarian, wide-eyed, bleeding from the mouth as a crowd yelled. All cases closed. Insufficient evidence. Officers' actions justified. Now juxtaposed with Marcia's arrest. Whitaker's hands gripped the sides of the witness box. He watched himself on the courtroom screen, saw his smirk, heard the tone in his voice that others had heard for years. The way he said, ma'am, not with respect but power. Marcia's voice broke through the silence. Court will recess until 2 p.m. When she stood, the room stood with her. Not out of obligation, out of awe. In the judge's chambers, Marcia removed the robe and stared at her reflection. The lines on her face, the calm she practiced, the armor she wore. She thought of her father, a civil rights attorney who died before she made the bench. He'd once told her, the robe won't protect you, baby. It'll just give them one more thing to question when they already doubt your right to be there. He was right. She thought of her mother, a Houston schoolteacher who taught her never to raise her voice unless she was raising a question. Of her college years, the sting of walking into law classrooms where professors mistook her for an assistant. Of her first trial, when opposing counsel asked if she was filling in for the real judge. The road to this courtroom hadn't been paved. It had been scraped from stone. Now, she was expected to judge fairly a man who had judged her wrongly in the street. Could she? Yes. But forgiveness wasn't guaranteed. Only process. 2 p.m. The courtroom resumed. It was tighter now, sweatier, the weight of something final in the air. The defense attorney rose. It was time for the gamble, the humanizing of a guilty man. Officer Whitaker, he said gently, tell the jury about your upbringing. Objection. Overruled. Whitaker spoke. I grew up in Baytown. Single mother. She worked nights. I saw the worst parts of our neighborhood. Drugs. Fights. Cops always coming through. I wanted to do better. I wanted to be the one keeping things safe. And how did that shape your policing? I learned to trust my instincts. Marcia arched one brow. The courtroom noticed. Do you believe those instincts failed you? I think they were influenced. By what? He hesitated. For the first time, maybe he thought before speaking. By what I'd seen, what I was taught, what I assumed. Are you racist, Officer Whitaker? No, he said, but his voice broke on the word. And yet the prosecutor cut in, you arrested a woman for existing while black. Objection. Overruled. You assumed she was casing cars because of how she looked, not what she did. You didn't ask questions. You made a choice. And now you sit here, asking for understanding that you didn't offer her. He said nothing. In the silence, Marcia tapped her gavel once. This court will reconvene tomorrow morning for closing statements. But everyone knew tomorrow was just punctuation. Today was the sentence. That night, the city spoke. Protests rose outside City Hall. Peaceful, fierce, handmade signs and candlelight vigils. Children in school uniforms holding up drawings that read, I could be her. Marcia watched from her apartment window. She didn't go down. Not yet. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. You did right, baby. You stayed bigger than what tried to belittle you. She wept then, quietly, just once. The next morning, the courtroom felt colder. The defense's final statement was short. My client made a mistake. A serious one, but not out of malice, out of misperception. And misperception can be educated. Please don't destroy a life over a moment. Then the prosecution. There are moments that define who we are. For Officer Whitaker, this was one of them. But more importantly, It's a moment for this city to decide who we are. If we excuse this, we excuse every unseen victim before her. The jury left to deliberate. Marcia remained behind the bench. 2 hours later, they returned. 4 persons stood, heartbeats held. On the charge of unlawful arrest based on racial bias, we find the defendant guilty. A hush swept through. Then one voice, then 2. Applause. Shouts. A warning from Marcia's clerk, then her own voice rising above it. Silence in the courtroom. Everyone froze. She looked down at Whitaker. This court recognizes that systemic bias is not corrected by one verdict. But we begin somewhere. Officer Whitaker, you will be sentenced following review, including the potential for termination and civil penalties. He nodded. His eyes glistened. As the room emptied, one young black boy stood near the back, maybe 11 years old. He stared at Marcia like she was a superhero. She met his gaze and nodded once. Outside, Houston breathed a little differently. Inside, justice for once had not been blind. That night, Marcia Ellison couldn't sleep. The sentence hadn't been handed down yet, but the verdict alone had shaken the department. Texts poured in from civil rights leaders, former law school classmates, and even 3 judges who had once avoided speaking too publicly about race. But the silence that struck her the hardest was from within HBD itself. No official apology, no press conference, no captain standing in front of a podium admitting fault. Nothing, because it wasn't over. Verdicts, she knew, didn't end racism. They just revealed it, like lifting a rock and watching the insects scramble. For the first time in years, Marcia didn't feel like a judge. She felt like a warning. The next morning, it began again. She stood in her courtroom, not behind the bench this time, but beside it. Today, she'd asked a colleague, Judge Hastings, to take over proceedings. She needed the distance, the perspective, maybe even a little protection, because what was coming wasn't protocol. It was personal. Whitaker's sentencing hearing had drawn even more attention than the trial. The courthouse had installed extra barricades, and plainclothes officers lined the back walls. Everyone knew the tension was about more than just one man. It was about what accountability looked like, especially when the system was forced to turn on itself. The prosecutor stood. We request Officer Daniel Whitaker's permanent removal from the Houston Police Department and a 5-year prohibition from serving in any law enforcement capacity within the state of Texas. Additionally, we recommend community-based restorative justice engagement. Restorative justice? Judge Hastings echoed. Yes, Your Honor. We believe part of this sentence must include confronting the very communities he harmed. Not just punishment, but exposure to lived experience. We want him to see what he ignored, hear what he silenced. Gasps, whispers, a few scoffs. But Marcia's eyes didn't waver. Then Whitaker's lawyer rose. We request leniency. Officer Whitaker has already suffered professional humiliation, irreparable damage to his reputation, and significant emotional distress. He's receiving death threats. He cannot walk outside without being labeled. Marcia almost spoke, almost reminded him that black women knew that reality from birth. But she remained still. This wasn't her courtroom today. Then the moment came. Would the defendant like to make a statement? Judge Hastings asked. Whitaker stood, slowly, hesitantly. He looked thinner than he had during the trial. Paler, the confidence stripped. What remained was a man, yes, but a man who had been exposed. Not ruined, but no longer invisible behind his badge. He cleared his throat. I have no excuse, he began. Only explanation. I believe the uniform made me right. That instincts could replace facts. That fear was enough to justify force. He turned unexpectedly to Marcia. I didn't see you as a person. I saw what I was taught to fear, and I used that to take your dignity. I'm sorry. She didn't nod, didn't flinch. She watched, absorbed. But forgiveness isn't theater, and contrition isn't absolution. Judge Hastings reviewed the sentence for a long pause before speaking. Officer Daniel Whitaker, this court acknowledges the seriousness of your offense, not only against Judge Ellison, but against the principles you were sworn to uphold. Your sentence is as follows. Effective immediately, you are barred from serving in any law enforcement capacity in Texas for a period of no less than 5 years. You will attend and complete a state-certified racial bias rehabilitation program. You are required to complete 500 hours of community service within the affected neighborhoods named in this trial. You are also ordered to participate in a public roundtable forum moderated by the Houston Civil Rights Commission. Whitaker bowed his head. The gallery rustled. Judge Hastings continued, "This sentence is not about vengeance. It is about clarity, about teaching a system to see itself." Then he struck the gavel. 3 times. The room didn't cheer. It didn't shout. It sat in stillness, like the moment just before a wound closes. Outside, the press waited again. Dozens of microphones. Hundreds of questions. But this time, Marcia stepped forward. Not as a victim, not even as a judge, as a voice. "What happened to me could have happened to anyone who looks like me," she said. The only difference was a robe. She scanned the crowd. We are taught to trust the system. But what happens when the system doesn't trust us? What happens when the protectors are trained to profile before they ask questions, to assume before they assess? The damage isn't just physical. It's historical. It's generational. A reporter raised her hand. "Do you forgive him?" Marcia's pause was long, not hesitant, thoughtful. "I don't forgive what hasn't yet been fully understood. Forgiveness doesn't come before truth, and truth doesn't come without responsibility." Another reporter asked, "Do you think this will change anything?" She looked past them, toward the city, the skyline towering behind them like silent jurors. "I think it already has," she said. 2 weeks later, Whitaker sat in the back row of a community center in 5th Ward. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, rows of people who didn't want him there but were curious enough to show up. At the front sat 6 panelists, activists, educators, former victims. And in the middle, Marcia. She wasn't a judge today. She wore jeans, a navy blouse, no makeup, just presence. "Welcome," said the moderator. "Today is not about punishing. It's about listening." Then the stories began. A woman described her teenage son being stopped and searched for matching a description that never existed. An older man recounted his arrest in 1982 for talking back to a white officer during a traffic stop. A teacher told of how her 8-year-old student asked if police were bad guys now. Whitaker listened. Some speakers glared at him. Some ignored him entirely. Marcia? She just watched. Then, after 2 hours, the moderator turned to her. "Judge Ellison, would you like to say something?" She stood, walked to the center, faced the room. "I'm not here to relive what happened to me," she said. "I'm here to help us understand why it keeps happening to all of us." She pointed gently toward Whitaker. That man didn't invent racism, but he enforced it, and now he sees the faces behind it. Then, looking at the audience, she added, "We can't undo history, but we can choose not to repeat it." There was no applause, only nods, eyes meeting eyes, the slow beginning of something difficult and necessary. Afterward, as people began to leave, Whitaker approached Marcia. He held out his hand. She looked at it, then up at his face. "I'm not shaking your hand," she said. "Not yet." He nodded. "Fair." Then she added quietly, "But I'm here, and I'll keep showing up. That's more than you did for years." He looked down. "I know." She walked away, not as a dismissal, but as an invitation for him to rise and follow, if he ever earned the right. That night, a video of the forum circulated online. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. What mattered was who saw it. Young officers, police academy trainers, law students, and a few quiet precinct captains who realized they needed to rewrite the way they taught suspicion. A few months later, Houston PD announced mandatory community forums as part of officer evaluations. The initiative was met with resistance, but it wasn't optional. Change had a name now, and it wore a robe. 6 months passed. Winter crept into Houston with less snow than northern cities, but the same kind of stillness, the kind that reminded people of everything they tried to forget. Judge Marcia Ellison still presided in the same courtroom, still wore the same black robe, but nothing else was quite the same. Not the air when she walked down the courthouse hallway. Not the eyes of her colleagues. Not the respect some earned, some performative, but all carefully measured. The trial of Officer Whitaker had come and gone, but its tremors lingered like an aftershock. Some days, she received letters. Most were kind young law students, black mothers, retired judges. Others were less so. Hate mail wasn't new to her, but the kind that came now carried a different venom. One note read, "You're setting dangerous precedents. Don't forget who gave you that bench." She didn't reply. She never did. But she kept the letters in a drawer, not as trophies, as evidence. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a fight to keep the wheels turning, even when the brakes screamed. On a Wednesday afternoon in late February, something strange happened. Whitaker requested a private meeting. Not with the press. Not even with the police board. With her. She thought long and hard before agreeing. The meeting was held in a neutral Satinga conference room in a neutral building, arranged quietly by the Civil Rights Commission. No cameras, no tape recorders, just the two of them. 2 chairs, a table, and an hour on the clock. Marcia arrived first. She sat by the window, watching the city move like it always had no matter who it crushed. Then he walked in. Whitaker looked different. Not older, just humbled. Like someone who had seen himself under harsh light and couldn't quite unsee it. He sat down, hands folded. "Thank you for agreeing to this," he said. Marcia gave a curt nod. "Let's not waste it." He exhaled. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "Good. That's not why I came." He looked down. "Then why did you?" She paused, then leaned forward slightly. "Because you're not just a man. You're a reflection. If I can look you in the eye and still believe in the work I do, then I know I'm where I belong." He swallowed hard. "I've done the programs. I've listened. I've read books. I've been screamed at by people who had every right to. But nothing hit me harder than watching that footage. Watching myself. I thought about how many people I didn't listen to, how many stories I walked away from. You can't undo the past. I know. But you can stop building your future on denial." He looked her in the eyes. "Do you think I ever deserve the badge?" "No," she said calmly. "Not the way you used it." He nodded, as if the truth, though sharp, was something he needed to bleed from. "I'm working with the academy now," he said. "Training modules. Bias recognition. Not mandatory yet, but it's a start." Marcia allowed a small, brief nod. "When you were a cop, your silence was a weapon. If you're truly using your voice now, maybe you can dull some of the damage." He reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the table. His badge. Retired. Turned in months ago, but still polished. "I don't carry this anymore," he said. "But I kept it. Not as pride. As a reminder." She stared at it. The same object that had once felt like a threat pressing into her back. Now it lay on the table. Powerless. "You don't need my blessing, Mr. Whitaker," she said. "You need consistency. Then, after a moment, and maybe one day, you'll need courage. The real kind. Not the kind that carries a gun." He stood. So did she. No handshake. But this time, no tension either. Just 2 people who understood, finally, what they had represented to each other and what they no longer needed to be. That spring, Houston launched a new initiative, Project Groundwork, a series of workshops in which officers and civilians, especially in marginalized communities, sat in circles and listened. No scripts, just stories. Marcia spoke of the first one. She didn't talk about herself. She told the story of a man named Jamarian Scott, 15, wrestled to the ground, labeled a threat, forgotten. She showed his photo, bright smile, missing front tooth, middle school basketball jersey. She said, "The system doesn't remember Jamarian, but we can." A week later, she received a letter from Jamarian's mother. Inside was a photo, Jamarian's little brother, now 12, holding a drawing of Marcia in her robe with a crown drawn above her head. The caption read, "You made people see us." She wept again, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a cry of exhaustion. It felt like release. In June, the State Judicial Board nominated Marcia for a statewide ethics committee. It was ceremonial, mostly, but symbolic. A black woman from Houston with a national profile. A survivor. A reformer. At the press conference, a reporter asked her, "Do you believe justice has been served?" She took a long pause before answering. "I believe justice has begun." That summer, she visited her old neighborhood for the first time in a long while. The corner store where she'd once been followed by the clerk was now a small cafe run by a Vietnamese couple who served $2 iced coffee to kids after school. She walked the sidewalks slowly, listened, felt. An older man called to her from his porch. "Judge Ellison?" She smiled. "That's me." He grinned. "You gave him hell, girl. Made us proud." She nodded. "Still trying?" "No need to try. You did." As she walked away, she heard him say softly to his granddaughter, "That's what justice looks like." 1 year after her wrongful arrest, a mural appeared in Houston's 3rd Ward. Commissioned by a coalition of black artists, it stretched across a brick wall with rich, vibrant color. On the left, a faceless black woman standing with her hands cuffed behind her back, shadowed under gray clouds. On the right, a black judge with the same silhouette, only this time. The clouds parted, and behind her stood a crowd. Not worshiping, standing with her. At the bottom, painted in sharp white letters, "Justice is not a title. It's a refusal to be silenced." Marcia visited the mural at dusk. She stood there alone. No press, no speeches, just her, looking at the version of herself that had once been broken on the street, and the version she had become. Not because she had risen, but because she had endured, and made the world see her not as a mistake, but as the mirror it had refused for too long. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.